book is called The Household Muse. So I'll get started if you two are ready.
Ready.
We're ready.
Okay, sure. So the structure of tonight's event will be an introduction. Then we'll have readings from authors Anne Valley Fox and Tom Ireland. And I'll ask a few questions in between the readings. And lastly, we'll have time to answer any questions from the audience. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to write them in the, or type them rather in the Q&A or the chat box there, and I'll address them there. Same goes for any questions you have for the authors, just write it in the chat or Q&A and we'll answer them at the appropriate time. Okay, so Tom Ireland and Anne Valley Fox live in Santa Fe together and are both longtime residents of New Mexico. Their book, The Household Muse, is a conversation between them in the form of short essays written over 4 seasons in 2018 and 2019, completed just a few months before the coronavirus outbreak. The exchange ends with the birth of a grandson, an event that invites the two to consider the time they have left and how to make the most of it. Please welcome Tom Ireland and Anne Valley Fox as they share The Household Muse.
Well, thank you, Jessica, for hosting us this evening. We also thank the Santa Fe Public Library for housing a world of wonderful books from the get-go. I know that if you're like me, you miss the physical wandering through the physical actual stacks in the library, but thanks to the kind devotion of our librarians, we can still get our hands on good books anytime. Tom and I began writing short essays, you could call them letters, back and forth between the rooms of our house. Ping, you have mail. You've got mail. That's more hip. In the summer of 2018, which Jessica just said, one of us would write a riff and the other one would respond to it or not. We wrote off the cuff and we took our time responding, often veering off into tangents or meandering the way maybe a good conversation will. The only rule of our game was that we not exceed 1 page per essay, 1 typewritten page. We volleyed back and forth like this over the course of 4 seasons. And in June of 2019, when Tom's daughter gave birth to a baby, we had the feeling that we'd come full circle. The book, The Household Muse, is made of the concentric overlapping circles of our inner and outer worlds. Some of the things that we talk about in the pages, the two of us, our home and what happens in it, writing and imagination, politics, previous marriages, our children and grandchildren, skunks, books, birds, angst, ecstasy, depression, refugees, dreams, good people, bad people, aging, lilacs. Tonight we're going to read 3 pairs of pieces from the book, and Tom will begin with Nothing to Report.
Yeah, I might add that none of the subjects that Anne just listed were anticipated before we started the writing of the book. We started with a title, which we stuck with, but we had no actual plan about what we were going to write about. It all became evident in the writing. And I'm going to start off with a piece that doesn't take place in our household specifically, but it takes place in our neighborhood. And one of the very few happy results of the pandemic is that it's inspired people to walk around the neighborhood a little bit more and look at things that they might not ordinarily be looking at. and paying closer attention to their immediate environment. I've heard that a lot of people have started or they've started bird watching during the pandemic and or else become interested once again, as in my case. And the piece I'm going to read has a bird in it, and I realized looking over the book just yesterday and today that there are a lot of birds in there. This one is called Nothing to Report. Forgive my glasses glare. Nothing to report. Taxation and revenue is on my walk. So I stop in to apply for a change of filing status. Why do I have to file every month when I almost never have any income to report? Last time I was here, they told me to come back next year, but maybe they have relaxed the rules since then. Or a more relaxed person will be sitting behind the plexiglass partition. I might interject that the plexiglass partition was a pre-COVID plexiglass partition. The waiting room is full of sullen taxpayers waiting, so I decided to come back next year after all. Heavy traffic on St. Francis Drive. Ever since my sister was hit by a car in Chicago and came away with skull fractures and the nearly total loss of her hearing, my relationship to moving vehicles has changed. I rehearse an angry sermon while crossing the street, ready to confront any driver who does not yield as expeditiously as they should. Read the law. It's illegal to run over pedestrians in New Mexico. On Columbia Street, cold as it is, a man stands on the curb smoking in the late afternoon sunlight. Columbia was my father's alma mater. He would love this scintillating Columbia blue sky and those ranks of frail white clouds arranged by consensus along an east-west axis. They are moving so slowly that I have to stand still to be sure it's them rather than me who's drifting. Left on Pacheco, through a ghetto of rental storage units, then right on Second. I stop in at Fine Consign to ask if they are interested in your mother's melodeon, now sitting useless in the guest room, although guests sometimes use it as a luggage stand. The manager writes down my name and number and the word melodeon, spelled correctly. I don't tell him that we're asking $500 for it, but will settle for nothing if anyone really intends to play it. At the rail trail, a male marsh hawk flies low over the train tracks, crosses my path, and alights on a power line. Most birds do not tolerate being looked at with full-on attention. But this one doesn't seem to mind the man standing by the railroad tracks looking at him. Another walker comes up from behind while I'm standing there. But he isn't interested in seeing what I see, or he's thinking that a man standing motionless in the cold should best be avoided. I move closer to the hawk to get a better look, and closer still until I'm standing almost directly below him. He doesn't fly away, not even when I speak to him.
And that piece, Nothing to Report, is paired with this one, or Tom wrote that one, then I wrote this one. Le Flaneur. Sometimes I glance out the window and see you standing stock still in the yard, regarding what's there. After a time, you might lift your gaze to consider the plum tree or the grapevines against the block wall. And I imagine you are pondering why the plums didn't ripen this year, how long it will be before the grapes sweeten, maybe wishing you built the wall a few courses higher to block out the red neon discount tire sign across the parking lot. Occasionally, when the door to your study is open, I glimpse you swiveled away from the desk, sitting perfectly still, maybe staring at your knees. And my initial response is alarm. Has something happened? Have you slipped into depression? This shock of anxiety subsides as I recall that you are a man of solitary consciousness who is most comfortable in the familiar space of his own mind. Unless I am holding a yoga pose or practicing some sort of meditation, I lack the equanimity to do, as it seems to me, nothing. My writing process may look from the outside like stillness, but of course I'm engaged in vigorous conversation with myself. If sometimes your capacity for inactivity strikes me as sublimely zen, at other times it seems utterly strange, which also interests me. When you stop in your tracks to see if it's you or the clouds that are moving, or you stand on the sidewalk motionless watching a marsh hawk, I am the stranger passing quickly by.
So a couple of years ago, Anne and a friend of ours were concerned about the United States immigration policy, and specifically about the children who were being separated from their parents and jailed in cages along the border. And so they decided to do something about it. They went to the plaza, Santa Fe Plaza, every Friday afternoon with signs and stood there for an hour, not saying anything, not giving speeches, just bearing witness to what was happening to these kids. And pretty soon, a number of other stalwart people joined them. And I did too for a time. And we did this for, I think, almost a year and a half. I was there for part of the time. And the piece I'm going to read occurred on Black Friday, which we just experienced, witnessed, acknowledged last Friday. And Black Friday is a fairly recent innovation of American capitalism. It's only a few decades old, and it refers to the need for retail companies to get into the black during the holiday season. This piece is called Black Friday. This is the high point of my day, says Dominique, digging in her coat pockets for the tiny American flag sneakers, one in each pocket, that she brings to the vigil every week and holds in one palm to remind people of the immigrant children separated from their families at the border. The plaza is full of vacationers and shoppers, few of whom take any notice of the woman standing in their midst with a pair of baby sneakers in one hand and a sign of protest in the other. When we began standing here last summer, she brought a shoulder bag full of children's shoes, rescued from secondhand stores, and placed them in a precise row before us on the flagstones. Now those many pairs have been reduced to the one she holds in her palm, a precious, fragile artifact. Dominique's husband, Dick, has Alzheimer's disease and can no longer be left by himself for long. He usually comes with her to the plaza on Friday, goes off for an hour, and returns when the clock at the cathedral strikes 3. Dominique worries constantly about him, fearing that he will get lost the way he did recently while hiking on his own. We do not need to ask why standing in the cold for an hour, exposed to the uncertainties of public attention, comes as a welcome reprieve from her responsibilities at home. Today, Dick has gone for a walk with a friend, and for a short time, she can relax a little. Dominique is more likely to stand silently than the rest of us. Most weeks, unless spoken to, she ignores the subdued, friendly chatter that we engage in as we stand waiting for the time to pass and the clock to chime 3. But today, departing from her usually steadfast, conscientious self, she complains about the inflatable plastic decorations that the city has installed in the plaza for the holidays. A monumental candy cane archway meant as a ceremonial entrance to the plaza, a grotesque snowman, a puffy sleigh that children can climb into and have their picture taken. Who is responsible, she asks, for all this cheerful ugliness? The spaces between our conversations lengthen, and for a while we stand in silence as the people pass, coming and going through the candy cane gate. Dominique keeps looking up at the sky, scanning the rooftops on all 4 sides of the plaza. What happened to the pigeons? She asks. There are always pigeons in the plaza, as in plazas all over the world, gorging on food scraps and befouling statues of military greats, but not today. The pigeons have been a reliable source of delight to Dominique all summer, especially when they burst into flight all at once, making us jump at the explosion of wings and air. She would watch, fascinated, as they circled in unconscious synchronicity above the plaza. I want to say that the pigeons went to the mall for Black Friday, but something in Dominique, the weight and darkness of her concern, stops me. She cradles the little sneakers against her body and waits restlessly for the pigeons, the children, and her husband to return.
So I'd like to read this piece. It's called Day Off, because it would happen to be written on this day, December 3rd, 2 years ago, which was the day of George H.W. Bush's funeral, as it happened. The kids mentioned in the first line refers to our grandkids, Mateo and Catalina, whom we would pick up from school, first grade and kindergarten, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Lily is their mother. Day off. The kids didn't come today. Lily had 2 surgery cancellations and called to say she hoped we didn't mind if she picked them up after school and hung out with them. So I swam extra laps, did some yoga stretches in the therapy pool, and lingered in the dressing room talking with someone about her organic composting business. On the way home, I decided to go through the mechanized car wash behind the Exxon station. I was listening to Amy Goodman's guests on Democracy Now!, the War and Peace Report, analyzing the political legacy of George H.W. Bush, who is lying in state. Inside the tunnel, I fought off vertigo as giant mops of spinning red tentacles rolled back and forth along the sides and over the top of my car. The leftist professors were wrapping it up as I drove home. One said that the general public, in light of the current incumbent, now sees Bush as a decent fellow, but his foreign policy, e.g. the invasion of Panama in 1989, during which the Pentagon tested deadly state-of-the-art weapons on civilian Panamanians, prepared the way for Trump's reckless racist nationalism. Another averred that nothing will change until Americans face the fact that our national sense of exceptionalism sets us up to bully the world. It's dusk when I get home. I find you at your desk with the lamp switched on. Hello, beautiful, you say, smiling your beautiful smile. A little later, you summon me back to sniff the air inside the homemade terrarium that's perched on a heating pad on your writing desk. Oh, delicious infusion of humid humus and sweet young leaves.
Thank you so much. Let me ask a couple questions and then we'll do your last paired readings. So I'm certain most Midtown Santa Feans saw themselves on the same path you walked. I agree. Something nice in this year has been that we've gotten to have a lot more time in solitude and to take note of everything around us. And I walked that exact same walk. It was kind of chilling to read it. I'm sure I've I passed by you as you watched a bird. Do you always write from what you know, and do you find it important to speak from your truth?
Not too long ago, we watched a documentary about Toni Morrison, who taught her writing students to imagine their stories. And I've never quite been able to do that. Anne is a much more imaginative writer than I could ever be. She is first and foremost a poet. And this book was sort of a departure for her writing in prose. But the short answer is, do I always write from what I know is yes. But another way of approaching that question is to say, I never know what I know until I start to write it down. And I see writing as a way of paying better attention to what is most immediate in my life and giving it some kind of importance that it might not have if I didn't notice it and write about it. So in one of the stories in this collection, I write about walking across the parking lot at Taco Bell and finding a nail in the parking lot. Now that nail doesn't have any importance in and of itself, but as a writer, it's my responsibility to invest it with importance. And at the same time, I can make fun of the man who's in the parking lot picking up the nail and saving the world from another flat tire. So yes, I do write what I know.
Thank you. I love getting absorbed in one of your writings or Tom's writing, and then jumping into Anne's writing, looking through Anne's eyes, looking at Tom, and vice versa. It's just viewing behaviors. I think it's fascinating to read a book like this and get a sense of two individuals who are so connected, but reminding the reader of how individual we are in our internal dialogue. What were some of your goals or intentions when taking on this writing collection?
Maybe we really wanted to find a new way to play together. And also, as I say in one of my pieces in the book, an almost autumn light comes up toward the beginning. I say, all my life I've been a writer, and being a writer is a very solitary business, which is really fine. It's it's restful and it's private that way. But at the same time, I feel like with Tom, with writing together with him, it's a great kind of pleasure to find companionship in the solitude.
I might add that we decided from the start that the book was going to be called The Household Muse, and we kind of played off the idea of the muse is the means of making music. So we wanted to make some kind of music together, or have some kind of dance together that we don't ordinarily experience in our writing life, because Anne's at the other end of the house doing her thing, and I'm over here doing my thing. And we get together at the end of the day. But this was something different, and it was pretty exciting to work that way for once.
Yeah, it's really inspiring. I love the idea, and I'm glad you guys did it. There's another chapter or essay I think Anne wrote that sort of touched on our consciousness and couples' consciousness merging into one over time. Do you feel that you two are sort of part of each other, that you're sort of connected, or is this something difficult about allowing your consciousness to merge with another? Sorry if this is too weird of a question, but I'm curious. So taking on a project like this, how do you think you guys differ or are the same when you approach your art?
Well, I thank you for your very intimate question, Jessica. I'm not going to answer it though. No, just kidding. I'm just someone, for whatever reason, you know, I kind of feel horrified over time about that merging of consciousness. I don't want to be the same being as somebody else. So that's maybe a block for romantic intimacy, but it's who I am, and it's all right. I think that writing, when I write and when I put my writing out there, that's my most intimate I get. And I honor that, and I go with it.
Yeah, I mean, we've all heard Maria Rainer Rilke's quotation many times from Letters to a Young Poet, in which he says the responsibility of the partners in a relationship is to protect one another's solitude. And I think we have succeeded in that. We don't intrude on each other's intellectual or private life, except at the end of the day. So we've learned to take care of each other that way, for better or worse.
I like it.
It seems that it's for better. You guys are a very inspirational couple. I love it. Would you like to read the next pairings, and then we can move on to more questions from the audience? Again, if you have any questions, just write it in the Q&A or the chat box, and we'll get to it right after these last two readings from our authors.
Sure. Good people, page 76.
Oh, thank you. So this is a condensed version of a much longer story that I wrote in ancient times. And it involves a trip that I took with two friends to Texas in, I believe, 1972. And we were involved in this was soon after I arrived in New Mexico. I arrived here in the spring of 1971. And a little more than a year after that, I got involved in the Native American church. sometimes referred to as the Peyote Church. And the three of us, who were friends living at a commune north of Taos, decided to travel to South Texas and cut peyote and sponsor a prayer service. And the story is called Good People. I might add that that trip took us to Starr County, Texas, which is on the Mexican border. And Starr County has been very much in the news in the last year because of the high incidence of COVID-19. In addition to the fact that in McAllen, Texas, where many of those children who had been separated from their parents were being jailed. Good people. Last night, the president spoke again of his determination to protect us from Central American migrants illegally crossing the Mexican border into the United States. People he has repeatedly characterized as murderers, rapists, drug smugglers, and terrorists. Thousands have been jailed in concentration camps along the border, officially called detention centers. I ran afoul of borderland law in the early 1970s when I and two friends, Molly, before we married, and our friend Vernon, traveled to South Texas to cut peyote for a meeting of the Native American Church. We belonged to a local chapter of the church in New Mexico and could legally use peyote in meetings here, but possession was a felony in Texas at the time for all but card-carrying Native Americans. We finally found some plants growing on the Texas side of the border, said a prayer, and quickly filled the gunny sack 1/3 full. Molly, wearing curlers to make her look more like a Texas housewife, took the peyote in her getaway car, a new Chevrolet Vega with Texas plates that she'd borrowed from her brother. Vernon and I planned to drive a different route home in my VW Bug, which had New Mexico plates. In downtown Roma, Texas, we were pulled over by the local sheriff's deputy, who said we'd run a red light. I doubt there even was a traffic light in Roma then. He found a little kitchen knife in the VW and cited us for, quote, possession of a dagger. They threw us in jail and released us the next day, but just after leaving town, we were arrested at gunpoint by agents of the state narcotics squad, all wearing white Stetsons and charged with possession of marijuana, a felony in Texas at the time. It was obvious that they had planted the weed in my car while we were in jail, and painfully obvious too that it was a bad idea to drive a VW Bug with out-of-state plates in South Texas. My father wisely hired a hometown football hero from McAllen, Texas, to defend us, a man on first name terms with the county DA. As I mentioned already, McAllen is one of the places where they've been separating migrant children from their parents and locking them in cages. 2 months later, after a brief hearing before the grand jury in McAllen, we pled guilty and were given a 2-year suspended sentence because, as the DA said, we came from, quote, good people, meaning white Americans with enough money to pay a lawyer. As we left the courthouse, he warned us, if you boys ever set foot in Starr County again, you're going to spend 2 years in the penitentiary. This I guarantee. Last night, the president observed in defense of his proposed border wall, quote, they don't build walls because they hate the people on the outside, but because they love the people on the inside, unquote. By they, he means people who have something to protect from those who have next to nothing outside those walls, such as the migrants being detained at the southern border. Evidently, he doesn't hate those people. He just wants them to go away. Evidently, having things and keeping outsiders from getting them are what make us, the insiders, good and lovable.
some of the pieces in our collection are kind of book reports, or they're riffs on things that we've read and where it sends us in our imaginations. This one is this piece is called Nobody. I've just finished reading The Boy on the Beach, Tima Kurdi's story of how the Syrian war forced her family to abandon their homes in Damascus and flee for their lives. They didn't all survive. Tima's sister-in-law, Rahana, and her two small nephews, Ghalib and Alan, drowned in an attempted sea crossing. Alan was a small boy lying face down on a Turkish beach, limp little body, face in the sea, in the photo that stopped all our hearts in September 2015. I don't remember ever reading a memoir this real and immediate. The pages are scented with jasmine blossoms of Damascus. They tremble with fear, with love. They are damp with grief. I heard Tima speak on the radio and then watched her online TED Talk. She speaks from the script of her heart, pleading to the world to wake up, to end the war in Syria and stop the tragic drownings and the grave desperation of refugee camps. I was just a hairdresser. I was nobody, she writes, until tragedy forced her onto the world stage. I know she's wishing she could be nobody again.
Thank you both so much for sharing parts of your beautiful book. So we have a few questions from the audience and a couple comments. Lynn says that she has a copy of your book and has enjoyed it immensely. Mark was hoping to hear of your grandkid, at least know of our congratulations on that big event in your life. Nan writes, I love this book and enjoy getting to know you both even better through reading it. This makes me wonder what new things you learned about each other while writing it.
Is that a question, I think?
Yeah. Sorry, I should have said that.
We could talk about that sometime, Nan, detail for detail, but you know, there's new information, but the strange thing is that it's like getting to know someone, and the more stories you hear and the more nuances you get and the more emotions that flitter through, in a way, the more mysterious they become. So it seems to me that my experience of writing these things with Tom is the more information, the more mystery. The mystery deepens because human beings are so vast. I feel like if we understood that about ourselves more closely, we might not be in this terrible, situation that we're in politically, with so much divide and divisiveness and so much labeling of the other. But we just seem to be at a stoppage point where it's hard to understand how vast and mysterious each of us is, how complicated, how complex. And complexity is a very good thing.
Does your writing practice help you both better understand the state of the world and kind of work out your role in it?
Yeah. I really am not a very political creature, although I do follow the news. And I learned my political consciousness and my understanding of what's going on in the world was raised considerably by moving in with Anne, because she sort of taught me to recognize my own anger, my own dissatisfaction with many things. And until now, I had no inclination whatever to write an opinion, because when you're writing opinion, you're always sounding pompous and opinionated, which was not in my repertoire. But many of these pieces, as you have heard this evening, were about social issues.
Because we are social animals. We're not egotistical individuals only. We're really so connected, and I think that all of us kind of get that more and more as we go along.
Anne has a piece in the book called "I'll Rant If I Want to," where she just turns loose. She puts aside propriety and niceness and just speaks screams her opinion, which as writers, you're taught to restrain yourself from that kind of display of emotion, of raw emotion. But it seemed to come naturally to you.
Well, you know what the saying is, you learn your craft in order to violate the rules.
Thank you. Deborah asks, for both the audience, the essays are written to an audience of one. For your other writing, do you write to a larger audience, or is your audience your own selves?
That's an interesting question, and it was a problem that we worked out during the writing of the book, because there is a you in many of the essays, not in all of them, but most of them. We address each other as you. At the same time, we were writing for a larger audience. In other words, it was the equivalent of an open letter, something that was between Anne and me, but we wanted other people to read. And so we had the problem, well, should we identify the members of our family, because we both know who we're talking about? And we decided, no, we shouldn't do that, because we are talking to one another. At the same time, we wanted it to be open to other people.
So that's why in the back, there's a glossary of names of the people mentioned in the various pieces. And it's not that it's really helpful to say, Nan, my sister, Anne's sister, or, it doesn't really help a whole lot a reader, but we thought it was funny, kind of fun to be able to identify our people. Because if they were mentioned in the story, in one of the stories, either we wrote it clearly enough so that that person's essence came across, or we didn't, in which case they could just fall back into the wallpaper anyway.
We knew from the start that this was not going to be like a journal, which is written to, as your listener said, written to an audience of one, which is oneself. We knew from the start that we wanted other people to read this.
Because we're writers, and writers you write from yourself, and you write essentially, first of all, for yourself, but you also have this phantom audience out there who you want to speak to, people, whoever you're trying to speak to, who you want to hear you, who you want to move some way or another, at least to get the person's mind to move, So that was our sort of dilemma or complex mutual reality.
Yeah, I mean, I know all the stories are personal and or stories, essays, but I could feel I connected to it a lot, and I think the glossary of people are so fun, and each time you name someone, I went back to it just check. It is really fun to know the relationship you have with all these people. And that was one of my curiosities with reading it too. Dawn asks, are you currently writing in the same format? Have your end of day conversation shifted based on this ever evolving format? Love the intimacy and the expansive consciousness that you both present and humanity. So the question is, are you currently writing in the same format, and have your end of day conversations shifted based on this format?
I think our end of day conversations shift every single day. Every single night it's different. What are we writing now?
Well, we haven't continued in the same vein. We decided at some point, not arbitrarily entirely, because we decided when our grandson Jasper was born a year ago, June, that we would end the book. We figured like we couldn't do any better than that.
Ta-da!
That was a fitting finale. And we haven't continued writing to one another. Each of us writes in a journal individually, but we're not anticipating that anybody will want to look at it.
I don't know, between books, I tend to just go down into my personal space and make notes and write in my journal and wonder what the heck is going to happen next, if anything. And that's kind of where we are. The book just came out in July, and we're still musing with the Household Muse.
Very cool. For those of you who haven't read it, the Household Muse, it's available at the Santa Fe Public Library for checkout. I put all the links in the chat box if you're interested. You can purchase it online, and you can find it available on both Anne and Tom's websites, which are also listed there, annevalleyfox.com, tomireland.net. Oh, we have one more question here. Lynn asks, Anne, has singing influenced you to write a song?
I might, Lynn. I might. Thank you for the idea.
I hope you do.
I sing with the Zia Singers, which is really fun. We're learning to sing online, virtually. So we rehearse together with the conductor Aaron Howe, and he plays the piano and sings and works us through our parts, and then we are all muted, and then we each need to make a recording of the song and send it to the Dropbox. It's a high learning curve, but it's pretty exciting, and there's some good things about it. Like, for instance, you don't have to wear a mask, and you can wear your pajamas on the bottom.
I don't have any pajamas.
That's so awesome. Very cool. I'm so happy that's happening.
Jessica, I should add that our book is also available at Collected Works.
That's right. I was going to mention also local bookstores, of course. Collected Works also holds the Household Muse.
It makes a great Christmas present.
Yeah.
The cover is a pastel by Nancy Suter called Dahlias.
You can see some of it behind me here. I've used their beautiful cover as my backdrop. I love it so much. It's beautiful.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions, so I think we can wrap it up, unless you have any further comments or thoughts you'd like to share.
Hang in there, everybody.
Yeah.
Come through this.
Thank you all for joining us. Learn more about our local authors, tomireland.net and annevalleyfox.com. You can find all their books on their websites. Household Muse was published by Tres Chicas Press in July 2020, It is distributed by small press distributors. I put the link in the chat, but you may also purchase it from Collected Works. And you can find copies at the local library to check out. And be sure to check Santa Fe Public Library's calendar for more upcoming virtual events. Thank you so much to our local authors. You're so generous to share your work with everyone. Everyone stay safe, read books, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.